Dallas, Texas, January 7th, 2024. Sunday morning in the southeastern Oak Cliff neighborhood began with a deceptive calm. The sunlight, still lacking its January strength, barely filtered through the blinds of the Lester family home on Grambling Drive. For 17-year-old Ikea Hood, this morning was significant. She was preparing for an important and undoubtedly difficult conversation. Just 3 weeks prior, she had become a mother, and the joy of new parenthood was clouded by unresolved questions that demanded honesty. Around 10:30 a.m., Takoya Lester, Ikea's mother, who was in another part of the house, heard a sound she would later describe as a thunderclap. An immediate, instinctive wave of dread washed over her. She rushed down the hallway to her daughter's room. The door was locked from the inside. Ikea, are you okay?" Her voice trembled. Her initial knock was hesitant, then grew increasingly desperate. In response, there was only a ringing, unnatural silence. Silence where the laughter of her energetic daughter should have been. Perhaps interspersed with the babbling of her 3-week-old granddaughter, Iceland. Panic mounted with each passing second. Takoya tried the handle again and again, rattling the door, but it wouldn't budge. Time seemed to stand still. Desperation spurred Takoya to the only action she could think of. She ran out of the house, circled around to the side, and rushed to Ikea's bedroom window. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The window screen had been dislodged and lay on the grass. Steeling herself, Takoya peered inside. The scene that met her eyes would forever divide her life into before and after. Her daughter, her vibrant, talented Kia, lay motionless on the floor. Dreams of a dance career, plans for the future, the joy of motherhood, all were obliterated in an instant by a gunshot that rang out in the quiet Sunday suburb. Ikea Hood wasn't just a teenager with big plans. At 17, she was a personality, a force of nature, as those who knew her often said. In the hallways of Lancaster High School, her name was synonymous with talent and grace. As a star performer on the prestigious Tigerette drill team, she commanded attention. When Ikea danced, you couldn't look away, recalled Quinta Gossett McVeigh, one of her high school dance instructors, her voice warm with the memory. She had this innate ability to make the most complex moves look effortless and graceful. That's a rare gift, especially for a 17-year-old. She wanted to graduate, go to college, dance at the collegiate level, and she definitely had the talent for it. Friends remembered a school event where Ikea performed a solo. The initially noisy hall fell silent, then erupted in applause as she executed seemingly impossible elements with an unwavering smile. "That was Ikea," one of her teammates said. "She made the extraordinary look ordinary, but she never lost her spark." Her passion for dance knew no school boundaries. Since 2019, she had dedicated countless hours to training with the Next Level community dance group in Dallas. The group's director, Notori Preston, watched her grow from a promising student to a dancer with true star potential. Ikea was so alive, with a radiant smile that could light up a room, Preston shared, his fingers seeming to recall her dance steps. She was always laughing, but most importantly, she was an incredible hard worker, always striving to master new moves, pushing herself further than anyone could expect. That laugh, not just a giggle, but a full-bodied expression of joy, was remembered by everyone who knew Ikea. At home, in a large and loving family where Ikea was one of 8 children, she was the unspoken heart, capable of diffusing any tense situation with a joke or simply by her presence. "Kia was a celebrity. She was everything to us," her older sister, Julia Williams, said, struggling to find words through her welling tears. When she walked into a room, everyone felt it. Not because she was loud, but because her very energy changed everything around her. She was our rock, our light. Family videos hold priceless moments. Ikea patiently teaching her younger siblings dance moves in the living room, everyone collapsing in laughter when the little ones couldn't keep up. 3 years ago, no one could have imagined what tragic mementos these recordings would become. Her notebooks were filled with choreography ideas and costume sketches. She spent hours watching college dance team performances, researching scholarship opportunities. Her dream wasn't just to dance, but to create something of her own. She talked about it constantly, Julia recalled. She was going to finish school, get her dance degree, and then open her own studio where young girls could express themselves through movement, just like she did. Ikea's Academy of Dance. That's what she wanted to call it. In December 2023, just 3 weeks before the tragic events, Ikea Hood's life was profoundly transformed. She became a mother. She named her baby girl Iceland. This event, far from dimming her ambitions, seemed to give them a new, even more powerful impetus. "Watch me. I'll show my daughter that anything is possible," she told friends after returning from the hospital. "Now, I'm going to dance on even bigger stages because she'll be watching me." Her room became a unique space where the world of dance and the world of motherhood coexisted harmoniously. A crib stood next to a shelf laden with dance trophies and medals. In dresser drawers, dance leotards lay vachis with tiny onesies and sleepers. She would often cradle Iceland while watching recordings of dance competitions, whispering to the newborn about the moves they would one day practice together. Her phone documented this new chapter of her life. Videos of choreography interspersed with her daughter's first smiles, sketches of dance costumes, Akanto pictures of baby outfits. "Becoming a mother didn't make her give up on her dreams," her sister explained. "She started planning even further ahead, talking about opening her own dance studio where young moms could bring their children during classes." Ikea had even created a special memory box for Iceland, filling it with ribbons from her dance competitions, photos of her performances, and handwritten letters about the legacy she hoped to pass on. Ikea Hood's relationship with her 17-year-old boyfriend Trayvon Wright was complex and contradictory. Ikea's family would later describe it as an on-again, off-again romance that had lasted for about 2 years. This recurring cycle of breakups and passionate reconciliations created an extremely unstable emotional foundation, masking deeper underlying problems. Subsequently, the Hood family would painfully reveal to reporters that there was a documented history of domestic violence between the young couple. Specific incidents were not detailed in the initially released police reports, but the very existence of such a history provided critical context for understanding the events that led to Ikea's death. My best advice, if you find yourself in a similar situation, is to leave and talk to someone, get help. Ikea's sister Julia would say, her words echoing with painful experience and belated realization. "I just planned my 17-year-old sister's funeral. Please, leave." When Ikea discovered she was pregnant, Trayvon Wright apparently believed without question that he was the father of the unborn child. He made a decision that, on the surface, seemed responsible. He dropped out of Lancaster High School, telling Ikea and her family that he intended to work full-time to support her and their future baby. "He told me he would be there for Ikea and the baby, no matter what," recalled one of Ikea's friends who had observed their relationship. "He talked about getting an apartment, about making sure the baby had everything it needed." This presumed role of an expectant father became central to his identity and his connection to Ikea. But then came news that ruthlessly shattered this illusion. A paternity test conducted sometime after baby Iceland's birth in December 2023 irrefutably showed Trayvon Wright was not the biological father of the child. "It devastated my daughter," Takoya Lester would later explain. Ikea genuinely believed Trayvon was the father. She had no reason to think otherwise. According to Lester, the families met to discuss the test results and seemingly agreed to move forward amicably. On the surface, there were no dramatic confrontations, no threats, at least none that outsiders witnessed. Both teenagers appeared to accept the situation, however painful it might be. "We all agreed that the most important thing was Iceland's well-being," Lester said. Trayvon's family seemed understanding. There were no signs of what was to come. However, something was brewing beneath this outward veneer of acceptance. Ikea, despite the complexity of the situation and their troubled history, decided to tell Trayvon this news personally. Text messages recovered from her phone showed that she herself had invited him to her home on that fateful Sunday morning, January 7th. She wrote that they needed to talk everything through properly and figure out where we go from here. She wanted clarity, some kind of closure, perhaps even to maintain some form of friendship, her mother recalled. That was Ikea, always looking for the best in people, always trying to find a peaceful path, even in the most difficult circumstances. She believed in second chances. That morning, Ikea had carefully dressed in her favorite pale pink sweater. She had fed Iceland and placed her in the bassinet beside her bed. The room was prepared for a conversation about the future, a difficult but necessary discussion between two young people at a crossroads. Ikea could not have known that Trayvon had come prepared for an entirely different outcome. The January morning of January 7th, 2024 was unusually warm for Dallas. By 9 a.m., Ikea had already fed Iceland, changed her, and left her under her grandmother's watchful eye in the nursery. Unlike most mornings when music and the sounds of dance practice emanated from her room, today, Ikea's bedroom remained quiet. She spent nearly an hour choosing her outfit, finally settling on a Lancaster High sweatshirt and jeans. Then she stood before her mirror for a long time, silently rehearsing the words she was about to say. At 9:47 a.m., her phone chimed, a text message from Trayvon Wright. "I'm outside." Ikea glanced towards the nursery where Iceland slept peacefully, unaware that her mother's next decision would forever alter both their lives. "He's here," Ikea called out, her voice sounding more confident than her hands felt. "We'll be in my room. It shouldn't take long." Takoya Lester watched them walk down the hallway, and the door to her daughter's bedroom closed with a soft click that would haunt her memories. It was approximately 10:05 a.m. The door, it would later be discovered, was locked from the inside. What exactly transpired in that room over the next 25 minutes can only be pieced together from fragmentary evidence, forensic data, and neighbor testimonies. Ikea's younger brother, who passed by her room twice on his way to the bathroom, would later testify. The first time, around 10:15 a.m., he heard voices, controlled but clearly tense. "You knew all along, didn't you?" That was Ikea's voice, sounding accusatory. "No, I didn't. I thought..." Trayvon's response, uncertain. "Don't lie to me, Trayvon." Not anymore. The second time, about 5 minutes later, around 10:20 a.m., the tone of the conversation had dramatically changed. The voices were louder, laced with desperation and anger. "Everyone's laughing at me now. My own family looks at me differently," Trayvon was shouting. "No one's laughing, Trayvon. This doesn't have to change everything between us." Ikea tried to calm him. "You made me believe for 9 months that this baby was mine." Then came Ikea's words, chillingly prophetic. "Lower your voice. You're scaring me." No one outside that room knew that Trayvon Wright hadn't just come for a talk. In his backpack, beneath a notebook and a water bottle, lay a loaded .38 caliber revolver, a weapon investigators would establish he had acquired just 2 days prior. While Ikea tried to find words to preserve some connection between them, Trayvon's hand, it seems, repeatedly touched the weapon in his jacket pocket. The decision had likely formed in his mind even before he crossed the threshold of that house. The exact moment when words escalated to deadly violence remains unclear. Did Ikea see the gun before it was raised? Did she have time to realize the mortal danger? Did she try to escape or defend herself? The only certainty is what happened at precisely 10:30 a.m. A single gunshot rang out so loud that, according to neighbors, a dog 3 houses down began to bark. Inside the Lester home, time seemed to fracture. Takoya, who had been folding laundry and keeping an eye on Iceland, froze. Her son dropped his video game controller. For 2 heartbeats, an incredulous silence hung in the house. That sound, it couldn't be what they feared. And then came the mother's desperate sprint down the hallway. "Kia? Ikea?" Her fists pounded on the locked door. No answer. She rattled the handle again and again with increasing force. The silence from within was more terrifying than any scream could have been. What happened next demonstrated the instinctive power of maternal fear and desperation. Instead of waiting for the door to be broken down, Takoya ran outside, circled the house, and rushed to her daughter's bedroom window. There, she found the screen pushed outward and lying on the grass, clear evidence of a hasty escape. Through the open window, she saw a scene no mother should ever witness. Ikea lay motionless on her side near her bed, facing the wall. A dark stain of blood was spreading beneath her chest. Her eyes were open, but saw nothing. The room bore signs of a short, violent struggle. An overturned table lamp, a chair thrown aside. On the floor lay Ikea's cell phone, its screen cracked. But Trayvon Wright was gone. Only the curtains, still swaying from his escape through the window, indicated how recently he had fled. At 10:40 a.m., just 10 minutes after Takoya Lester's frantic 911 call, the first police patrol car arrived at Grambling Drive. officers found a heartbreaking scene. Takoya, having already climbed into her daughter's room through the window, refusing to believe the obvious, was cradling Ikea's lifeless body. Paramedics who arrived shortly after could only pronounce 17-year-old Ikea Hood dead at the scene. The cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the head, fired, as experts would later determine, at close range. The medical examiner would specify the wound location at trial. As investigators and forensic specialists processed the crime scene, one of the detectives noticed something clutched in Ikea's hand. Her fingers gripped the object so tightly they had to be gently pried open. It was a slightly crumpled photograph of newborn Iceland, taken just days before. In her final moments, her maternal instinct had made her reach for what was most precious. Police K-9 units analyzing blood spatters on the floor noted a detail that spoke volumes. Unlike typical shooting scenes, the pattern of the stains indicated that Ikea had tried to move, to crawl, after being wounded. But not towards the door or the window. Not in an attempt to escape, but towards a small table where she kept photos of Iceland. She wasn't trying to get away, one of the officers remarked. She was reaching for her daughter's picture. Outside, the neighborhood around Grambling Drive, near the intersection of University Hills Boulevard and East Wheatland Road, became an active search zone. Officers scoured Wright's possible escape routes, but initially found no trace of him. The Dallas Police Department issued an official statement confirming that 17-year-old Ikea Imari Hood had been shot and killed and had died at the scene. By that evening, the investigation had gathered enough evidence to name Trayvon Wright as the prime suspect. Police sources confirmed to local news station WFAA that Wright had been believed to be the father of Hood's newborn daughter. But according to the deceased's mother, the child was not his. This critical detail pointed to a clear motive for the crime. Hood had planned to tell Wright this news on Sunday, the police statement read, corroborating Takoya Lester's testimony about her daughter's intentions that morning. The Dallas Police Department acted swiftly. On January 8th, the day after the shooting, an arrest warrant was issued for Trayvon Wright on charges of murder. This initiated an intensive manhunt throughout Dallas and its surrounding areas. Law enforcement agencies Jitong Hodzo, with U.S. Marshals specializing in apprehending dangerous fugitives, joining the search. Meanwhile, Wright himself, while on the run, was making one mistake after another, leaving a trail of digital and witness evidence. CCTV cameras captured him fleeing down the street several blocks from the Lester home, constantly looking over his shoulder. At 10:51 a.m., just 20 minutes after the shot, he hailed a rideshare via a mobile app using his own phone. This provided police not only with his approximate location at that time, but also with a key witness, the driver. He looked very nervous, the driver later told investigators. Constantly checking the windows, asked me to hurry, said he was late for something important. His hands were shaking the whole time. The car took Wright to an apartment complex in North Dallas where, it turned out, a friend of his lived. The building's security cameras recorded him entering at 11:23 a.m. with his backpack. What wasn't caught on camera, but which Wright later admitted during interrogation. On the way, he stopped at a dumpster behind the building and disposed of the gun used to kill Ikea. "I just wanted to get rid of it," he would tell detectives after his arrest. "I wasn't thinking straight." The coordinated efforts of law enforcement paid off. Using cell phone data, witness statements, and information from Wright's social media, marshals and police narrowed down his possible whereabouts. Early on the morning of Tuesday, January 9th, approximately 48 hours after the murder, an operational team surrounded an apartment in East Dallas where Wright was hiding. After brief negotiations with the apartment's primary resident who convinced Wright to surrender, he came out with his hands up. "He just walked out, hands up," reported one of the U.S. Marshals involved in the arrest. No resistance, almost as if he was glad it was over. Trayvon Wright was taken to the Dallas County Jail. The arrest affidavit detailed the events leading to Hood's death. The mother hearing a noise around 10:30 a.m., finding the bedroom door locked, then seeing the open window with the screen pushed out, and finding her daughter with a fatal gunshot wound. These details painted a clear picture of both the crime itself and Wright's hasty escape from the scene. A judge set bail at $500,000, effectively ensuring he would remain in custody until trial. His booking photo distributed by the media showed a teenager with an inscrutable expression, hiding a storm of emotions or their complete absence. News of Ikea Hood's tragic death and Trayvon Wright's arrest sent a chilling wave through Lancaster High School, just as students were returning from winter break. Instead of joyful holiday stories, they were met with an official letter from the school administration and the presence of grief counselors ready to offer support. Lancaster Independent School District is deeply saddened by the tragic passing of our student Ikea Hood, the official statement read. Her death is a great loss for our district, and we will provide counseling and grief services for students and staff affected by this tragedy. Our thoughts and prayers are with her family and the entire Lancaster High School community. The counselors' offices filled immediately. Members of the Tiger A drill team gathered, hugging each other, unable to imagine practices without her infectious laughter and flawless technique. Teachers, who had watched Ikea's academic performance grow alongside her dance skills, sat stunned at their desks. Even students who had only known her casually felt the weight of this untimely loss, a potential extinguished so cruelly and prematurely. She corrected my form once during practice, a freshman dancer recalled, tears streaming down her face. I was so embarrassed, but then she stayed after to help me get it right. That's who she was. Demanding, but kind. The school hallways, once echoing with Ikea's laughter, fell silent. Her locker instantly transformed into a makeshift memorial. Flowers, handwritten notes, photos capturing her mid-dance. Teammates taped her competition number to the wall above the locker. Someone had placed her dance boots at the base, polished to a shine, just as she always liked them. On Wednesday, January 10th, just 3 days after the murder, hundreds of people, students, teachers, family members, and concerned residents gathered on the school's practice field for a balloon release ceremony. The crowd formed a circle, with Ikea's family at the center. Her dance uniform was displayed on a stand, her competition medals hanging from the collar. Takoya Lester, struggling to hold back tears, looked at the sea of faces that had come to honor her daughter's memory. "This is just incredible," she whispered, turning to her sister. She let me know. She touched everyone's life, just her name. You say Ikea, and this is what happens. As hundreds of pink and white balloons, Ikea's favorite colors, soared into the cold January Texas sky, it seemed as though the reality of her absence finally descended upon everyone present. This ceremony was not just a tribute of sorrow. Ikea's friends and classmates had organized a collection of donations for her orphaned daughter, 3-week-old Iceland, bringing diapers, baby formula, and clothes. Even in their deepest grief, the community united to help the infant Katu would grow up without knowing her mother's love and care. "I know her spirit is still here with us with all these people," Takoya said, clutching her granddaughter as the last balloons disappeared into the clouds. For the Lester family, grief was compounded by concern for tiny Iceland. She's not sleeping. She's not eating. She misses her mom. Julia Williams shared tearfully with reporters a few days after the tragedy. "Last night was my first night with her, and it was a very hard night." Even at her tender age, Iceland seemed to feel the void left by the disappearance of her mother's warmth and voice. The trauma of that day, invisible and unconscious, nonetheless imprinted itself on her fragile psyche. Ikea's 7 siblings vowed to rally around their little niece to ensure she grew up knowing how wonderful her mother was. Dance studios across Dallas expressed their support, recognizing the immense loss of talent that Ikea possessed. Julia Williams' words at a press conference became both a cry from the heart and a warning to others. "My best advice is to leave and talk to somebody, get help. I'm begging you from the bottom of my heart. I just planned my 17-year-old sister's funeral. Please, leave. Talk to your mom, talk to your aunt, talk to anybody in your family, talk to somebody at school. Please, get out of there." Her words, full of belated understanding and unbearable pain, were bought at a price no family should ever have to pay. During the balloon release, many couldn't help but notice how the expressions on little Iceland's face, sleeping in her grandmother's arms, sometimes mirrored her mother's. The same determined set of her jaw, the same curious eyes, taking in the world around her. In that tiny face, Ikea Hood's legacy continued. Breathing, moving, living, despite everything a bullet had tried to destroy. A year later, in January 2025, Trayvon Wright, by then 18 years old, stood trial in a Dallas County courtroom facing a first-degree murder charge. dressed in a formal shirt and tie. He had lost a significant amount of weight during his year in custody. His eyes darted nervously between the jurors, the judge, and Ikea's family, who occupied the front row of the courtroom. The silence in the courtroom became almost palpable when Wright, against his lawyer's advice, chose to testify in his own defense, a risky move that surprised even seasoned court observers. His voice was barely audible at first. He painted a picture of a tragic accident, not a premeditated murder. "I never meant to hurt Ikea," he stated, his eyes downcast. "I wish I had killed myself, then she would still be here. It was an accident, period." According to his testimony, he had previously been diagnosed with depression and an anxiety disorder. The paternity test results, confirming he was not Iceland's father, had, in his words, pushed him to the brink. He claimed he brought the gun to Ikea's house that day, not to harm her, but to end his own life. "I couldn't see a future anymore," Wright testified, his voice cracking. "Everything I thought I had, being a father, having a family, it was all gone. I just wanted the pain to stop." Wright described how, while sitting on Ikea's bed, he took the gun out of his backpack. He claimed he put the barrel to his own head, and it was at that moment Ikea saw what he was doing and lunged at him. "She tried to grab the gun," he said. "We were struggling for it, pulling it back and forth, and then it just went off. I didn't mean to pull the trigger. I would never intentionally hurt Ikea." The defense built its entire case on this version of events. In the absence of direct eyewitnesses to the shooting itself, the prosecution had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was not a terrible accident during a suicide attempt. Wright's attorney repeatedly emphasized this point during cross-examination of prosecution witnesses. "You were trying to figure out what happened because you were not in the room when the gun discharged, correct?" the lawyer asked Takoya Lester as she testified. "Correct," she replied through tears. "All right, thank you, ma'am," the lawyer concluded, nodding manjak at the jury. However, the prosecution had science on their side. The medical examiner, using detailed diagrams and autopsy photos, too graphic for some jurors, demonstrated why Wright's version did not align with the physical evidence. "The angle of the gunshot wound is inconsistent with a struggle," the expert explained, pointing to the photos. "In a struggle, we would expect an unusual angle, perhaps an upward or sideways trajectory of the bullet path. Instead, we see a direct wound, characteristic of a situation where someone points a gun directly at the victim's head and fires." Firearms expert James Wilcox also testified that the revolver, recovered from the dumpster where Wright had discarded it, required significant pressure to pull the trigger. "This is not a weapon with a hair trigger," Wilcox explained. "It is extremely unlikely that this gun would discharge accidentally during a struggle without someone deliberately pulling the trigger." But perhaps the most damaging testimony for the defense came from Wright himself, under the prosecutor's skilled cross-examination. When asked why he fled the scene if it was an accident, Wright struggled to provide a coherent answer. "I was scared," he said. "I wasn't thinking straight." "Scared enough to climb out a window instead of using the door?" the prosecutor pressed. "Yes." "Scared enough to take a rideshare to a friend's apartment instead of calling 911? "Yes." "Scared enough to throw the gun in a dumpster?" Wright whispered. "Yes." So quietly, it was barely audible in the courtroom. "If this was truly an accident, Mr. Wright," the prosecutor continued, his voice ringing in the ensuing silence, "why didn't you stay and try to help Ikea? Why didn't you call for her mother? Why didn't you try to save the mother of the child you claim to care so much about?" A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Wright had no answer. The prosecution built its case on what they called the 3 C's: character, capability, and consciousness of guilt. They presented evidence that Wright had previous run-ins with the law as a juvenile. They proved he knew how to handle a firearm. And, most importantly, they highlighted his actions after the shooting: fleeing, hiding the weapon, evading arrest, all pointing to someone who knew exactly what he had done. As closing arguments approached, the jury had 2 starkly different narratives to consider. Was this a troubled young man who accidentally killed someone he cared about during a suicide attempt? Or was this a deliberate murder committed by someone enraged by paternity test results who then tried to evade responsibility? After 3 days of testimony and 6 hours of deliberation, on Friday, January 17, 2025, the jury returned to the courtroom. The room fell silent in anticipation. Trayvon Wright sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the jury box. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Jones asked. "Yes, Your Honor. We, the jury, find the defendant, Trayvon Darnell Wright, guilty of murder in the first degree." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Ikea's mother covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Wright showed little reaction, only a slight slump of his shoulders. The judge sentenced Trayvon Wright to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. "Mr. Wright," the judge addressed him, "you cut short a promising young life and robbed a child of her mother. While I acknowledge your youth, the calculated nature of this crime and your subsequent actions cannot be overlooked." Outside the courthouse, Takoya Lester, surrounded by her family, addressed the waiting journalists. "Today doesn't bring us closure because there's no such thing when you lose a child," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "But it does bring us some peace, knowing that the person responsible will face consequences." Julia Williams stood beside her mother, holding 1-year-old Iceland, who bore a striking resemblance to her mother. "We're all coming together to make sure Iceland knows who her mom was," Julia said. "She was amazing. She was everything. She loved you," she added, looking at her niece. In the year since Ikea's death, Iceland had grown into a cheerful, energetic toddler. She had started dancing as soon as she could stand, swaying to music with the same natural rhythm her mother had shown. "Sometimes it's like seeing Ikea all over again," Takoya Lester said, watching her granddaughter. Lancaster High School established a memorial scholarship in Ikea Hood's name for students wishing to study dance in college. The Tigerette drill team dedicated their season to her memory, performing with pink ribbons on their uniforms and creating a signature move called the Ikea Spin. The tragedy also prompted local schools to develop awareness programs about relationship violence and its warning signs. Community support groups for young parents expanded their services, offering resources for teenagers navigating the complexities of early parenthood. "Iceland will dance on stages her mother never got to," Julia said with quiet determination. "She'll graduate, go to college. She'll have all the opportunities Ikea should have had. We can't bring her mother back, but we can make sure Ikea's dreams live on through her daughter." The story of Ikea Imari Hood is more than just a tragedy. It is an agonizing reminder of the fragility of young life, of the destructive power of jealousy and uncontrolled anger, and of the critical importance of recognizing red flags in relationships before it's too late. Julia Williams' words resonate as a bitter warning. "What was done to my sister, I don't want it to happen to anyone else. I don't want another family to feel this pain." For little Iceland, justice is an abstract concept. No verdict can bring back the bedtime stories, the dance lessons, the graduation cheers that should have come from her mother. Yet, in her young face, the family sees Ikea's features, her spirit, her passion, already emerging. Ikea Hood's dance was brutally cut short, but the echo of her story, her light, her unfulfilled dreams must continue to resonate as a warning, as a call for vigilance, and as a quiet hope that her legacy, embodied in her daughter and in the memory of those who loved her, will help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Every story of violence told is a chance to save a life. Ikea Hood should not have died, and no one else should.